reading from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you. Written by Swami Kriyananda and based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is entitled, What Was the Star of Bethlehem? Divine vision is the opposite of worldly sight. Divine vision sees God's presence behind all outward appearances. Worldly sight sees appearances merely, coating even the blazing wisdom of a saint. A master to the worldly man is a human being with perhaps a slightly better attitude than the norm. The scriptures therefore strive to demonstrate how the divine consciousness, when openly active among men in the lives of great masters, must never be viewed as an expression of ordinary human consciousness. To seek the presence of divinity behind the life of a great master is to prepare oneself to recognize that same divinity also in lower manifestations, until at last one beholds God everywhere. Thus it was that Yogananda, on observing his new disciple Swami Kriyananda, struggling with the contrast between the Guru's human appearance and his inner divine reality, looked at him deeply one day and said, "If you only knew my consciousness." The story of the birth of Jesus Christ contains an account in the Gospel of St. Matthew of the Star of Bethlehem. The wise men who saw Jesus in his manger said, "We have seen his star rise in the east, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till at last it came and stood over where the young child was." This account was important, for it showed all mankind that Jesus was a divine incarnation and no ordinary man, that he brought divine consciousness to earth, even though he would play a human role among human beings, and that others too, by receiving him in their hearts, would acquire power, as the Bible puts it, to become the sons of God. The scriptures enjoin us to meditate on the lives of great souls, that we may discover our own latent spiritual greatness. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it, "Who knows the truth touching my births on earth and my divine work, when he quits the flesh, puts on its load no more, falls no more down to earthly birth. To me he comes, dear Prince." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Yogananda said that even God and his angels celebrate Christmas for the good of all humanity. And as we have decorated our temple, I like to imagine what God's celebration looks like. And one thing I thought of this morning, you can close your eyes for a second and just visualize that, but we know how beautiful snow is when it's just gently falling. Imagine if it were opalescent light, little snowflakes of opalescent light, changing color as they fall, and instead of melting when they hit, they just have a little burst of light. That'd be beautiful. And I'm sure there are thousands and millions of other wonderful astral ideas you can imagine, and God has thought of them all. And imagine this beautiful tree so lovingly decorated. Imagine if it were 100 feet tall. And imagine the music, angel choirs, not just our little foursome singing, but hundreds of angels, and the instruments, and the flowers. We have beautiful white and red flowers. Imagine millions of them. We went to a wedding once in India, and there was an archway that was maybe 20 feet long. And when you entered the wedding venue, there were roses stuck into the ceiling, just hundreds and hundreds of them with lights. So you were walking through this incredible rose arbor. The fragrance was heavenly. The Indian scriptures say that when something really auspicious and wonderful happens, rose petals fall from the sky. So imagine this incredible celebration that God and his angels have for the birth of Christ. And why? Why? Because not only Jesus and great masters and saints, but Jesus in particular, brought salvation, brought an end of pain and grief and confusion that is the human condition. There's so much suffering in this world. We were really cold the other night, and I was thinking, yeah, well, think about Ukraine and what they're going through, and how wonderful it is not to have bombs falling on us. But the human condition is full of, our history is full of war and death and pain and struggle and famine and grief. But the great ones come, and this Christmas season is all about, they come to bring salvation from that, freedom from that. Death, you will die, as one of the lines in the Messiah says. That is the message of this season. And the doorway that we walk through to be free of this anguish, this, as Krishna called it, my ocean of sorrow and suffering, we carry it with us all the time. It's right here. This spiritual eye, this depiction, a gold ring, and inside of it a blue field, and inside of that blue field a white star, a silvery shining star. And what do we have to do to get there? We have to be still, which is sometimes the hardest thing in the whole world to do. But that's the gateway. We have been given the sacred keys of awakening, as the Festival of Light says, through these teachings, how to still the body and the mind and the heart's feelings, how to still that commotion of life. So many of us are just on this roller coaster of health, disease, death, pain, joy, fleetingly. Sai Baba said a wonderful thing. He said, joy is an interval between two pains, and pain is an interval between two joys. So that's the roller coaster of life. Up and down, up and down. Oh, we got the good job, but oh, we hate the boss, On and on and on and on. It's never right. Swami would say it's like trying to get pillows just right when you're sitting. Just, there's always something. Or he said when you are trying to wash a shirt in a sink, you just push down one bubble and it bubbles up somewhere else. Trying to think of that line in Come Gather Round, get rid of one trouble and you face its friend. There's always something to fear, something to be cringing about that we don't want. And what do we need to do? We need to practice God's presence, where everything is all right. I remember a time when I was very new on the path and I was really struggling, going through a very difficult time. And Swami wrote to me and said, just put your hand in Divine Mother's hand and walk through this together. God will be there if you bring him in. He's always there. He is us. He's experiencing everything we're experiencing. It's not like he's over there and sort of watching. Oh yeah, going through a hard time again. No, he's feeling it. He's there. He's in us. In fact, it's helpful to practice what liberated souls or very high souls will do when they are at that state of consciousness. They go through every past life because they can experience that, they can see it all our past lives. They go through every one of them. Joe Fabitz, the pirate, Joe the banker, Joe the priest, all these lifetimes and lifetimes, and they go through every one and realize that it was always God as the doer in everything. And they let it all go because it was always God. So that's what we can do with this lifetime. We may not know all the stuff from the past, but even if we do, we can just realize that it was always God doing it and let him have it. Lay it at his feet. Be free. And know that no energy is ever lost. We lose loved ones, we lose, as the Festival of Light says, we lose everything we had. But all those that we love are still there, and we will meet them again. Of course you've had this experience, everyone's had this experience where you meet someone and you think, oh, an old friend. I was just reconnecting with one of my childhood friends. Such a dear lady, and she's had such a hard life, but her spirit is just as I knew it. And it helped get me through high school, I'll tell you. Those friendships were very, very significant and helpful. If I meet her again in another life, I know I'll recognize her. I was thinking of a dear friend, a different friend, Carol Strieber, from 5th grade, and she and I used to dance the polka. We had this big parking lot for our playground, and we would just fly from one end to the other, just dancing and dancing and dancing. I'm never going to forget her. Buddha says we should be kind to every person that we meet, because in some life or other, we've been very close. Imagine that. Everybody you meet at the grocery store or the bank or Costco or anything, people in line, they're all part of your family. So I will just close by reiterating that this season is the season of salvation. Don't spend time being lonely or feeling sorry for yourself or in pain. Lay it at God's feet and see the bigger picture. Salvation is at hand. We have to become still, see that spiritual eye, and go into it. And we will see those heavenly realms Master promises us. We will be part of that incredible celebration with God and his angels. And I'll just close by offering this little story. St. Francis lived in the 1100s, so it was more than 1,000 years since the birth of Christ. And nobody had thought to do this until Francis came along. And he wanted to have that birth of Christ be real, to be able to really look at it and feel it and bow to it. And so he created the first creche scene. There was a little chapel, and behind it there was a grotto, a little cave. And he realized all the many people who wanted to come to that Mass for Christmas, probably a midnight Mass, couldn't fit into the little chapel. And so he created the first creche scene. And he had a statue of the baby Jesus in a manger with straw around it. He brought in a cow. He brought in sheep and a little lamb, a donkey. And he had real people playing Mary and Joseph, the shepherds, the angels, the kings. And you can imagine, with St. Francis's devotion there, how charged the atmosphere must have been, and how miraculous that birth, the divine coming into human form in that helpless, tender, sweet child, not born into wealth in a palace, but in a humble little stable. And at one point during that evening of Mass and meditation and singing to God, Francis knelt and picked up the statue of the baby and held it in his arms. And it's part of Catholic tradition. It was seen and witnessed by all those people that that baby became real, that it wasn't just a statue anymore. It was a real baby. And so let us take whatever realization, whatever experience of God, whatever love that we feel, and treasure it, just like that little baby. That's the birth of Christ consciousness in the soul. That's the beginning of salvation, of freedom from all the pain and suffering and madness of this world. That's the beginning of it. Celebrate that, treasure that, nurture that, until finally the Star of Bethlehem leads us into the heavenly realms.
This question that forms the subject of today's service, what was the Star of Bethlehem, could be retitled, what is the Star of Bethlehem, just as Nirmala has been conveying that star is a living presence. And I've told this, I've alluded to this before. There's a scripture that was recently made public. It was discovered long ago, but it was in a very obscure language. It was ancient Syrian, which I don't know if any of you speak ancient Syrian or even Syrian modern. But anyway, it took a long time to get this thing translated in a form that could be released, but it's the Gospel of the Magi, and it's the story of the Magi and how they came to follow that star and come to Christ. And I confess to, Scripture can seem a little obscure, it can seem kind of dated or just a little hard to understand the way the language is. This particular one, for me, somehow, if you just took what we understand and conveyed it in Old English, that's exactly how we would say it. They were following something that only they could see. Which is to say, they weren't looking up in the sky at some astronomical event. They weren't, I went to as a little kid, I went to the planetarium at Christmas in Chicago. Great planetarium. I mean, it's really an awesome space. And, even little kids, even a whole mess of squirmy little kids, you sit down in that place and it gets quiet and the lights go down and it's like, whoa. And then stars start to show up on the dome of this thing. But I mean, just the shape of the place kind of has this temple-like feel to it. And even a whole mess of school kids, it's like you instinctively just quiet down. Well, they did this amazing presentation on what was the Star of Bethlehem. And, gave all these different spiels of it, this comet and that planet and maybe this and maybe that. And at the end of the day, they came up with nothing. They didn't actually have anything. They didn't ever actually say, okay, and it was this. Because in the year such and so, this thing went shooting through the solar system and that must have been what they saw. No, they never came to any conclusion at all. And it was like, these are adults. I mean, we're kids. What is this? You guys can't just sort of fob this off on us. I mean, it just annoyed me. I never forgot that. But when you think about it now, and from this perspective of it being an inner reality, and in that scripture they talk about this place where they came from, they had been expecting this star since thousands of years. They had been, they would go and they would check for it. They would look for certain signs, and when the signs finally came, then they followed it. And, it's right there in the scripture, and Swami used to point this out. They saw his star in the east, but they were going west. But they followed the star. What does this mean? They were walking backwards all the way across the desert? I mean, it's like, how do you get there from here? They were following something inside. But what the most inspiring part of that scripture for me is not that star so much, like it being something outside of themselves, that star became the child. They were literally following Christ across whatever distance it took. They were following him. And when they arrived at the place where he was to be, the star became the child. Now that changes the whole picture, because then you're following an inner realization. Well, I will just suggest humbly that we, all of us, are magi. Magi, the word itself relates to the word magic. You know, it's this mysterious or mystical reality. It's an inward reality. It's not something that everyone will understand. We, all of us, are magi. And the light that we follow is not just a light that we may or may not see in meditation, where we may or may not understand it clearly. It is the light of our own inspiration, our own upliftment, our own desire to understand. That is the light. And when we follow it, and I have this clear memory, and I suppose that all of us here in one way or another have had something like this experience. For me, it happened when I was 19 years old. Happened to be reading Swamiji's autobiography, The Path. And I got to a certain point, and the story and the import of it, the implication of it was so powerful to me that it literally took my breath away. Which is to say, I was not breathing. I didn't need to breathe. What was the point of breathing? I was in this other place. And when that sort of experience comes, there is no distance, there is no time, there's nothing else to compete with that. And my life took a sharp, right-hand turn, left-hand turn. I took a sharp turn, let's just say, towards the spiritual path. In a sense, I suppose I was always on that path. I just didn't understand it until that point. And from that point, it was very, very clear that's where I'm going. That's the beginning of the journey of a magi, is to realize, oh, that's what my life is for. That's what I'm following. I am following that star. And I will follow it until I find that Christ child. And it's all in the present tense. I love that. Let every heart prepare him room. It's not like, we're doing it imaginarily, like for 2,000 years ago. No, it's like today. He's like coming for lunch today. Get the house ready. Get this house ready. Get all of it ready, because he's coming. He's here. And I'll just suggest, because this is the week, Friday is our all-day meditation. And we're going to do it in a very custom, COVID sort of organized kind of way, but we're going to do it for 3 hours here in the temple from 8 until 11. We'll have a break and we'll continue online. It'll be online all day, but then later in the day it'll be only exclusively online. That word only is one of those words where you realize that language can trip you up. They followed the star in the east. Well, that word east also means that which goes before. It also means this, the forehead, the eastern part of the body. That's a very mystical, very inward way to understand it. Only in India means specifically. In the West usually it means exclusively. So if somebody says to you, I only will be there, yeah, it means he specifically will come, but he might bring 25 of his friends. And that's not quite the way we would necessarily understand it. That's one of the ways that language sort of trips us up. And so if they followed his star in the east and they were going west, and you think, okay, they didn't go all the way to the end of China and get on a boat, and there was no Panama Canal, and they had to go all the way around South America to get, it's like, no. They were following something inside, and it led them unerringly. Whether it led them in an inner state Whether they could just sort of translocate instantly and be in Jerusalem doesn't even much matter. They followed that star until they found him alive in this world, the living presence of Christ. On Friday, we will experience that. We'll experience it all week and every day, all day if we tune into it, but specifically when we're all gathered together meditating on that light. It is powerful. Let's dive into that. Saturday night, Christmas Eve, we'll have a beautiful candlelight ceremony here. Christmas comes on a Sunday this year, so we get to have Sunday service on Christmas morning. It's an amazing time to just feel those blessings, feel that light. The magic of it coming into this world is just something incredible. It's all the imagery that Nirmala gave us. Take all of that inside. See that light descending as a divine celebration, descending as opalescent snow, descending as however you can visualize it, but also know that that is your own. He is your own. Let us follow that light until we reach the Christ.